Well, thanks for being in my class on the Prophet Muhammad. I call this series my Peace and Reconciliation series, since there's been, the thought, I guess, in the Western world is that Islam is typically a violent religion. And so I want to go through that and talk a little bit about that and maybe why, and then I want to talk too about some academic attempts at looking at the life of the Prophet Muhammad, Prophet of Islam, and some ideas too that were a little bit outside of the realm of strict Orthodox Islam. So with that, I'll get started. Okay, so the Prophet, he was called Al-Amin, means the trusted one or the honest one. I'll explain later in my class what that means. He was born 570 CE and died 632 CE. He was born in Mecca, which is on the Arabian Peninsula, right in the middle of the peninsula. Okay, so his lineage starts, the story says, it starts with Adam, goes down to Noah, and then through Ishmael and Isaac. This is where they split, okay? And on the Isaac side, you have Judaism, okay, and Christianity. On the Ishmael side is where you have Islam, okay? And then under Ishmael was Abdul Muttalib, which was Muhammad's grandfather, okay? And Abdullah is his father, and then there's Muhammad. So that's the split, and the way the story goes, now again, we talked in my prior class that Abraham was not a historical figure, okay? It was probably, there might have been a person like Abraham, but there was probably a story about several stories at the time they made up about a famous figure during that time. Okay, so the story on the Islam side is that Abraham had Ishmael through his, really his maid servant or mistress Hagar. Okay, he also had Sarah, and so Ishmael was born first because Sarah was known to not have children. Okay, so Ishmael was born, and then Sarah got mad because Sarah was actually his wife, and said, well, I don't want Hagar and Ishmael here anymore, and sent them off into the desert. Okay, and then okay, so that's the story, and then later when Sarah was actually, according to the biblical story, 90 years old, she had Isaac. Okay, so she was bestowed by God to have a child when she wasn't supposed to. So she had Isaac, and then that's where you have the whole lineage here. Okay, now what's interesting about this is we know that most scholars agree that there's no historic figure called Abraham. Okay, so according to Karen Armstrong, who's a religious scholar, she was a Roman Catholic nun, and she left and started studying in depth the world religions, especially Islam and Buddhism. Okay, according to her, Muhammad one day was reading the Old Testament, the Torah, and read this story about the split, okay, and then said, hey, Ishmael's our guy, basically, okay, and was very pleased that the Arabs were not, that God didn't just abandon the Arabs. Okay, so hey, Ishmael's our guy, and then he, because he was considered a messenger of God, because he got, I'll explain that, that's coming up, that he had to come through down that lineage. Okay, so again, a lot of this is a story not necessarily historically accurate. Some of it is, some of it is not, what we're about to get into. And here, there's this thing right in the middle of Mecca called the Kaaba, which is a cube. Okay, and if you've ever seen a picture of them when they do the pilgrimage to Mecca, it's called a Hajj. And you see lots and lots of people around this big cube. Okay, so this cube called the Kaaba was supposed to have been built by Adam, the first man, and then it was rebuilt by Abraham and Ishmael, and then it was again rebuilt by the clan called the Quraysh that was in Mecca, one of the main clans. Nikki?
What's it made out of?
Like stone.
Uh-huh.
Stone. So, okay, so this Kaaba is a special place of worship, okay? And I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I want to give you kind of a little bit of a basis here. So the way the story goes is these clans, there were several clans in this area of Mecca. This is the Kaaba. Several clans that at one time followed the one God of Abraham, okay? But because of the influence of the surrounding areas that were polytheists, meaning they worship many gods, this one God got corrupted, okay? So then all these clans in Mecca became polytheists, okay? And then after so many years, these pilgrims, or they call them the Bedouin tribes from the areas, they were nomads, and they traveled the area, and they would come and they would come and worship these polytheists. Okay, and they were like idols, like big stones and stuff. Okay, so they would come and worship them, give them money. Okay, so the Quraysh, which was the tribe of Muhammad, they were the ones that were the keeper of the Kaaba. And so they wanted these tribes, these clans from the outside to come in, the Bedouin tribes, and give money to these polytheists, these stones, because it'd be their money then, okay? So, and I am jumping a little bit ahead, but before I go through his lineage here, I mean his timeline. Okay, so now with this this clan Quraysh, there was no equality. There was slavery. There were some sources that I've read says there was human sacrifice. Other sources don't really mention much about it. But there was significant troubles. Infant mortality was very high. It was basically, there was a lot of fighting, a lot of violence. It was basically, watch out for myself kind of attitude. Okay, so this was going on right before the time the prophet was born. Okay, and during his early lifetime. Okay, so let me go quickly through his timeline. So he was born in Mecca, which is in the center of the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, his first revelation was in this cave. He used to go to a cave to meditate. And he was known even before he got his these transmissions from the angel Gabriel. He was still considered to be a very honest person, and he didn't like the violence and all that kind of stuff that was going on before he became Muslim. Okay, so then he, in 622, he had to escape to a city called Yathrib, which was later called Medina, which means city in Arabic, but it was actually, a lot of people later called it the city of the prophet, but it really means just city. All right, 629, he comes back peacefully to Mecca without revenge and brings peace to all of Arabia. And then he dies next to his wife Aisha, and I'll explain that, unmarked grave as well. Okay, so I'll just kind of give you the short of it here. Not too much ahead, there's so much. Okay, so we talked about his lineage a little bit. Muhammad was born to Abdullah, his mother was Amina, and his grandfather was Abdul Muttalib. Okay, now what's interesting about the story that they tell about this is that his the marriage between, well, first Abdul Muttalib did worship the one God of Abraham, okay, and he was an honest, respectable man. And then he had the son Abdullah, and then so one day Abdullah, who was 25 years old, Abdul Muttalib said, it's time for you to get married, I need to pick a wife for you. Basically, that's the way they did things back then. So they said, there's this lady, Amina, I want you to marry her. So Abdullah went with his father, Muhammad's grandfather, and they were walking, and this woman from another clan stops him and says, you have this light, would you like to be with me, basically? And he said, well, I have to go with my father. I'm supposed to go to my wedding with Amina. And she said, please, please stay, and he would. And he had this glow from like heaven, the story says. Okay. So then...
Wait a minute, that Abdullah did?
Well...
Who had the glow
yes,
from heaven?
Abdullah did, because he was the father of the prophet to come. Okay? He had this glow. So, and this is a story, guys. And I'm going to explain why I think this is just a story that's coming up. So, Abdullah was going, this woman stopped him and says, hey, you've got this glow, you're really cool, you know, I want you to be with me. And he said, no, I have to go with my father and get married. Okay, so he got married to Amina. Okay, then he saw this woman again the next day, or the next couple of days or something. And this woman says, you don't have the glow anymore. So, you know, go away, I don't want to talk to you anymore, basically. Okay, so this is how the story goes. Okay, so Abdullah and Amina then had Muhammad. Okay. Now, Abdullah died.
So the point of the glow story is what?
The point of the glow is what he's going to be a prophet, the messenger of God.
Why did it come?
First, according to the story, this woman who stopped him thought he would be the messenger of God, or was a messenger of God, but it turns out his son would be. Okay, so that's the story. So Abdullah died. Okay. The grandfather lived still. Amina stayed alive for a while, and because the prophet only had a mother, it was typical in the Arab clans for you to go to like a foster family where you had a mother and father. Okay, so the prophet went to live with a foster family, and and you'll find this interesting. The way the story goes is that he was with this foster family, and wherever he was, there was always enough food and stuff for him to eat because he was a messenger of God. where other clans didn't have so much. He was being cared for by God. That's the story, okay? So, and then another story says that two angels in white came down, opened up his breasts, okay, and had a basket of a gold basket of snow, and pulled out this bad like blood clot that was sin, and poured this basket of snow that cleaned his heart and closed him up. That's the story, okay? And it's also in the Quran, it says that. Now we think, scholars think that there's some symbolism there. You're taking out the sin and making someone, clean and all that kind of stuff through your heart.
So he was a.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just. Was he a? Okay, this is.
He was orphaned eventually. Okay.
But he was aware of the symbolism of wash your sins away, white as snow in the New Testament. Do you think?
Possibly.
I mean, that's.
Well,
he was aware. I mean, or he was. The New Testament was there.
Yes.
Correct.
No. Yes.
Yes, it was.
The New Testament and you're right.
Right.
And
So
that's key. That's important.
right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's just where I'm thinking. Maybe he saw that reference to wash your sins white as snow. You know what I mean? The snow and the okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but all right. There some scholars, including Islamic scholars, would question whether Muhammad actually ever really existed. Okay, and I'm not saying that to discredit Islam at all. This is an academic class, and we want to look at both sides of the argument. Some scholars say that he might not have existed, and who wrote the Quran was taken influences from the area. Different people wrote the Quran, is what some scholars say. Just like the Old Testament, there was a multitude of different things. So that was the symbolism they inserted into the story, basically. Okay. Some people also say Muhammad did really live. He lived farther north, way farther north of Mecca, and I'll explain that too. But anyway, I'm telling you now the story. Now, during my research, I found out there's several different sources that say several different things. Okay, and one of my sources was a group in Lebanon. They're Shia Muslims, and their story about Muhammad is pretty typical with most scholars as the story goes. Like the story of Jesus, the birth, and they're a little different between Mark, Matthew, and all that kind of stuff. So it was pretty consistent, but it shed a very positive light on the prophet. Okay, and so what does that tell you about that community? That they have a high ethical standard and some things. It's like how you tell the story. Like in my Judaism class, we talked about how freedom resonates from a person. It's a natural desire to be free. And that, when we talked about the chosen people, the Jews were chosen people, or were they people that chose to be free? Okay? So the same kind of goes with Islam. The story basically is saying that there shouldn't be slavery, there should be equality. I know it's hard to believe, but Muslims are supposed to have equality for women as well as men. That same equality. Okay, so that's the story that was passed down. And so again, we're talking about freedom, equality, and things where there wasn't that, and people, it was like uprising and changing. Because, hey, this is right, we're all created the same in God's image. That's the message. Okay, so,
But
Sarah?
are you saying, you mentioned the Shia Muslims, are you saying that that's the message they present as opposed to, there are different messages
right,
overlapping, some differences here and there. Are you saying the overall story of Islam is freedom and equality, or
Yes.
this view of Islam is freedom and equality?
No, the overall story.
The overall?
Yes, yes. But there are people that take things out of context, as well as in the Old Testament. Because, and I'll explain this in a minute, the Jews of Medina, that when Muhammad actually migrated to Yathrib, which was later named Medina for city of the prophet, okay, there were Jews there. Well, the Jews didn't recognize him as a prophet because he wasn't one of the chosen ones. He wasn't a Jew. That's the way the story goes, okay? So, again, you have to think, they were stuck in this little mindset in the Old Testament, you know, if you have to be Jew, you have to be chosen, all that kind of stuff. Instead of, if you're a chosen person, you choose to be free. That's the bottom line. So, their theology at the time, or the way the story was written, was they're saying, hey, we're the chosen people, we're better than all you guys. And the Arabs were actually stronger than the Jews of Medina. And it really made the Jews mad because they thought, we're the chosen people, and you're leading us. So they had a problem with the prophet because he wasn't Jewish, and he was considered a messenger of God. Okay, so there's the theology there is, that's how they got stuck in their little, you know, I'm better than you kind of attitude. Okay, and then, but scholars, a lot of scholars like myself, believe that people who are chosen are actually the ones that chose to be free. Okay, so that's where you get the confusion with some of the violence. They take things out of context in the Quran as well as the Old Testament, the Torah.
The Old Testament refers to the Jews as the chosen people. Does
Yes.
the Quran refer to the Islams as the chosen people in the same
No.
sort of fashion?
No, but the Quran says that if you're Muslim, you submit to God. That's what Muslim means, submit to God. Islam is the word, is rooted in peace, which means submission. So to be Muslim means you submit to God. And if you do that, then you have to live peacefully with what they call the people of the book. It's called al-Kitab in Arabic, people of the book. So
Does that mean the Jews?
the Jews and the Christians, okay, because Jesus was considered a prophet to the Muslims. He wasn't considered the Son of God, but he was considered a prophet and a very special person, actually, to the Muslims. So, if you're Muslim, the people of the book, you're supposed to live peacefully and allow them to worship how they want, because they are of the book. Okay? The same thing, they're a God of Abraham. You have Isaac over here, you have Ishmael over here. And that's where, when you have Muslims become Christians or vice versa, Christians become Muslims, that's where there's no, that doesn't make sense if you're a true Muslim following the Quran. Now, it does say in the Quran about the infidels and all that, but it's talking specifically about people that are coming against you. In the Quran it says you're not allowed to use violence unless it's in defense. And of course, you can change things all around, you know, the way you want it. And that's the problem with it. And that's when I think where the violence comes in. So, okay, so we talked, let's see.
Let me see if I can articulate a question, Tank, just
Sure.
sequentially, see if I can get it in my head. The Jews had a long tradition of being the chosen people
Right.
before Jesus comes onto the scene.
Right.
Was Islam, it was in existence at that same time
No.
prior to Jesus?
No.
No, okay.
Yeah, It wasn't till after he was born. So he was born in 570,
Okay.
and so it was I think
Yeah.
I said 620,
Yeah.
But-
620 where he had his first, that's when Islam started, actually.
Okay.
Okay, so, and this is important. So you had Jews in that area, but you had Christian influences and Buddhist influences in that area.
But before that, you had Jews and you had just
And you had
polytheistic.
Christians.
No,
Well,
before Christ.
Oh, yeah. You
You
had
just had
Jews
poly-
yes.
And that was all you had.
Basically.
Okay.
Well, Buddhists and Hindus, but Hindus were polytheists.
Okay.
But they're different.
Okay.
All right, so before Muhammad, in the 300s, what did these group of people that believed in one God, what did they consider themselves before Muhammad? They weren't Jews, they weren't Christians. What was there a name given to that?
No.
Not really.
They were supposed to follow the God of Abraham, but they
But
weren't
they
really
felt second
Jews.
class because they
Right.
were not part of the chosen people.
Right, not part
And
of
that's
the
why
Jews.
Mohammed had such an appeal to them, because
Right.
now they felt like, oh, God didn't leave us out.
That's right.
We're coming through this other side.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And
But usually a group of people has a name or has some identifying. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Some identifier. Like
I don't-
we are the blah, or we are. They just believed in. They were just not Jews that believed in the one God. You know what I mean?
Did you have a group that converted? I mean, it's not like there was just a body of people floating around without.
well, they were nomads in that area.
And-
They were Bedouin tribes, and they were a mix of things. Because you had Gnostics, you had Christians, you had Jews, you had Gnostics, which I'm going to explain what that means in a minute, which were huge influence. They were kind of a spin-off of Christianity a little bit, and then you had Buddhist influences in that area too.
But we're still going back before that. Would the Jews have considered them in 300 Gentiles?
Yeah,
So that might have been their name.
Yeah.
It could
I see
be.
what you're saying.
it could be.
Okay.
There were a lot of Christians and a lot of factions kind of spun off Christianity, like the Gnostics, during the 300s, the 400s. Gnostic, everybody knows what agnostic
Right.
means, right?
Right.
Agnostic means basically you question the existence of God, but it actually means having no knowledge.
Right.
Gnostic means knowledge. So Gnostics think that through knowledge, through mysticism, they get in touch with Christ, with God. Okay, and that's where Buddhism comes in. Buddhism influenced Gnosticism because Buddhism, through your meditation, is you get closer to your enlightenment. So that's key there.
I'm still hung up on that. And this is just completely ignorant question, but the Jews at this time, this 500, 600 time period, the Jews really didn't have, I know what we consider Jew, but how was that defined back then? Was it by where they lived? I guess I don't understand where the break happened.
Well,
Do you see what I'm
they were Arabized Jews, okay? Means they were kind of a mix. They were kind of a sect.
But did geography, more so than anything, break up where these monotheistic group that later became Islam? I don't know.
Let me see if I can find a map, and I'll show you. Let me put the map. I have one on here somewhere.
Did Jews, there was no homeland at this point, is right?
No, but it's close. It's all in that area.
Okay, so we're still pointing to kind of geography in
This
this.
is not the best map, but all right, Mecca is around right here, and Medina's up here. Okay, so
Where's Israel?
it's farther north.
Okay.
Is that right, Mike? Yeah. I always sometimes I get my geography confused. So, I started having some weird thoughts. Like Ezra, the prophet Ezra, they thought he might have been the son of God. Some of these Jews that were. So, there was some, they weren't considered Orthodox Jews really. Okay.
Well,
Let me see if I can.
maybe using a vernacular that we might be a little bit more familiar with. The time
All
of
right, here we
Christ.
go. All right, Mecca is down here. Okay, Medina, and then Israel's right there. So see, it's not far away, to Medina. So it makes sense why there were some Jews in Medina, and why the Arab influences changed their thought a little bit. Okay. And basically, the Jews of Medina, and I'm going to explain that a little bit, they did not get along with Muhammad, even though they invited him there. They invited Muhammad to Medina to mediate the conflicts between the Jews and some of these Arab clans that were there. So he brought the peace, but they didn't like him because he wasn't Jew. He was Islam, and he said, you can worship how you want, I'll worship how we want, our groups. And one source that I read says that Muhammad actually followed some of the Jewish ceremonies, worship. Yom Kippur was one. I don't remember the other one. But he actually was following it because he believed these were people that loved God's people. Okay? They believed in the one God of Abraham.
Well, where Israel is, along through there, we know, at least the Old Testament part of this is that was the promised land, and there was Galilee and Samaria and
Yeah.
Judah,
Yeah.
and of course Jerusalem was in Judah,
Right.
and you know,
Yeah, it was
they got
split.
carried off into captivity up in Syria and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, Canaan was,
And they got
Yeah.
spread out, and so some of those Jews ended up down there in the Medina area, and others were other places, but kind of geographically, the bulk of that would be from that Israel place. And then they would go out wherever they went, and they would still consider themselves Jews and believing in the one God and
Right.
trying to, marry within the
Right.
Jewish clan and try
That's
to stay
right.
separate, but then, of course, that didn't work either.
I just wondered, did they, before he came along, did they consider themselves from Isaac? You know what I mean?
say it again?
Like, at the time of his grandfather, did they consider themselves from Isaac? Do you see what I'm saying? You know, or did the whole Ishmael line just pop up into Muhammad's head or whatever?
Well, according to Karen Armstrong, she says that Muhammad made that logical assumption, that he was reading the Torah.
But so nobody had necessarily, that wasn't something that they thought as a group.
Right.
He just kind of,
Right.
That thought kind of became the glue that pulled them
Yeah.
all
Right.
together.
Well, it made sense to Muhammad. It was logical. He was, sitting reading the Torah and said, "Hey, wait a second. Ishmael is on the Arab side." Because
but he only had to have that thought or have the need to have that thought
Right.
if there was some sort of disagreement or some sort of something that they didn't want to no longer be a part of the Jews. You see what I'm saying? There had to be some
You mean part of?
conflict or
You
some.
mean part of the polytheists? Because he was
No.
he was in Mecca during this time.
Now, I think what she means is, the Jews said, we're the chosen people,
Right.
you're not, and that's divisive. And so they felt like kind of,
But at what point did it become you're not? Do you see what I'm saying? Because if all these people got spread out, these monotheistic groups, they considered, probably early on, they considered themselves Jews no matter where they was. Sometimes something happened that somehow Muhammad's group of I'm not talking about polytheistic people, but
Right.
whoever was believed in one God, why he felt the need to even come up with coming from Ishmael. You see what I'm saying? He, in my opinion, he wanted to be separate from
But see, that was
Isaac's
earlier. He hasn't.
lineage.
See, he was in Mecca, where they're polytheists. There were no Jews in Mecca. Okay.
Right.
He was forced.
But it had
out.
to have been, if they were studying the same Old Testament, they had a sense, the Jews had a sense, or anybody studying the Old Testament probably had a sense that they came from the Isaac lineage. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So why did he feel the need to say, we don't come from Isaac, we come from Ishmael? There already had to exist some sort of, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not really.
No, I do.
Well, they had
I mean-
lost all the privileges.
Well, I think
of
it.
being from
I
Isaac.
think it was because Ishmael was sent to the desert, where the Kaaba was in Mecca, and Ishmael. And the story was that even before Muhammad brought Islam to Quraysh, to Mecca, I think the story was that Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba, even before there was a Muslim. Okay. So I think he said, well, wait, that's great, because that means, we're from that side of God hasn't forgot us. Okay. That's what I think.
Did they trace their lineage back as consistently as the Jews did?
I don't know. The thing about Islam is theology wasn't until recently, because it was frowned upon, because you were not supposed to question God, just accept it. And theological speculation was kind of frowned upon. So they didn't do a lot of research until last maybe a couple hundred years. So that's why now these scholars, especially this German scholar who is a Muslim, is saying, hey, wait a second, Muhammad may not have even existed. And he's getting a lot of...
The fatwa is about to come.
Yeah, well, one of his peers believes that Muhammad really did exist, okay, but he's protecting his because he's a scholar. He teaches at a university in Germany, but he's saying, hey, he has a right to his scholarly thought, and the Muslims shouldn't be ready to shoot him or whatever. Not that they would, but there's enough crazy people that they would. I mean, you say, back in the day, you say Jesus Christ wasn't the Son of God, and somebody come up and shoot you, So.
And this is a current scholar.
Yes, current scholar in Germany, and I'm gonna talk
Is
about
there a lot of outside historical documentation of Muhammad? Not really.
There is some, but there's not that much more than the Quran. And they're saying that the Quran was a cocktail of texts, okay, pieces of text. And it's also in this book called the Western Traditions book. The guy that wrote the piece on Islam, I don't have his name right now, but talks about how the Quran is basically a bunch of pieces put together, okay. And this is not to discredit Islam, because we know the same is about the Old Testament. There were, how many writers did I say when I taught the class? There were 5 writers. The priestly writers, there were different writers in the Old Testament. The same.
But do the Muslims, core religion, believe that there was just one Muhammad?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Orthodox Muslims believe the story that I'm telling you is historically accurate. Orthodox Christians believe the Orthodox widow, little o, believe that the Abraham existed, Moses existed, the whole thing. Okay. So, all right, let me jump way ahead here. bear with me. Okay, it's right here.
Sorry, we got you off track, didn't we?
No, it's all right. It's good, the conversation's good, so. Okay. All right, so we talked about the breast being open. See, this is from the Quran. Do not be sad, for your Lord says, have we not opened your breast for you, O Muhammad? Okay. And cleansed him of sin, of the original sin or something. And whatsoever Allah wills to God, he opens his breast to Islam. See? There's some symbolism there, basically. All right, so this is the story I just told you. Now, this is interesting, the last piece here. Satan toucheth every son of Adam the day his mother beareth him, save only Mary and his son. Okay. Now, we know that it was Christian influences, Gnostic influences in that area during that time. This tells you that, hey, wait a second, Mary and Jesus, you know, I think the Catholics at one time thought Mary was conceived without original sin at one time, and then that's why she had to have Jesus, who was sinless. And so I think this is an interesting piece here. When the more scholars look into Islam, the more they see influences by Christianity and by Gnosticism. Very, very interesting. And also, Buddhism influenced Gnosticism through your meditation, getting close to God kind of perspective. So that's where you start seeing things come together. You know, so anyway, so that's that piece. Move ahead. Okay, here's some key figures I want to talk about him. Abu Bakr was his first friend, the first caliph, which is like the leader in Islam, the leader of the community. Okay. Abu Talib was his uncle, and after his mother died, he left the foster parents. His mother died, and then his uncle took him in as his overseer or whatever. Khadijah is his first wife, who was older than him, and she had been married, I think, was it 3 times before? But according to the story, she was a brilliant woman, fairly unusually wealthy for a woman in the Arab society, and they had several kids because infant mortality was high. Some of his kids died. So she's a key figure. She was actually considered to be the first Muslim. And Abu Bakr was right after because he was one of his best friends. Okay, Abu Jahl, they call him the father of ignorance because he was dead set against Muhammad according to the story. Okay, and everything he did in his power was to keep the whole pilgrimage, people coming, bringing the money, getting richer. So he ends up dying in one of the battles, and one of the stories says that they cut off his head and brought it to Muhammad in one of the battles because he was so bad. He was torturing people, starving people because they had become Muslims, and so now that's really inconsistent with the message of you exist only in defense, but that's one of the stories. The other story is he just died in battle. That was it. So, all right, Hamza was his uncle. He was considered a great Hamza because he used to go out with his bow and arrow and catch, hunt. He was big and strong. Abu Lahab was his uncle, but also was sort of like Abu Jahl. He was an adversary, was completely against being a Muslim. And the important thing is about being Muslim at this time was there was no slavery, there was equality, and according to the story, Muhammad lived a frugal life to ensure that persons were well fed and well taken care of, especially the children. Okay. Abu Sufyan was a big adversary. Okay, but later he converted. And what's interesting in the story about him converting, as well as Khalid, these were both big, like leaders, like military strengths, and they both came up to Muhammad and said, "I was wrong. You know, I want to be a Muslim, but my conscience, I feel terrible because I've done terrible things." And according to the story, the prophet just says, "We'll pray forgiveness to God, and you're welcome to be a Muslim and live, you know, peacefully." Okay, so, which is interesting because, you know, people, again, this is where the whole forgiveness things come in, and you talk about how there's some similarity with Christianity. And what one of my sources was from a professor called Martin Lings. He was a Sufi Muslim. He died in 1995? I think he was 85 years old or something. But one of my sources, he talks about the prophet and saying, "I'll forgive him 70 times. Okay? And where do you hear that from? The gospel, Jesus, right? Which I don't remember which gospel that's in. But Jesus says, they asked Jesus, how many times do you forgive him? 7 times, and Jesus says, no, 70 times. Obviously, Jesus means forgive him, keep forgiving. Okay? And so, according to Martin Lings, the prophet made a quote, we need to forgive 70 times. So obviously there was some Christian influences, which were key there. Okay, yeah, Aisha is interesting. All right, the prophet had many wives. According to the story, the narrative, he had many wives because they were widows, because the husbands had died in battle. Okay, so he took them
I
in.
take care of you.
They were basically, yeah. But Aisha was the daughter of Abu Bakr. She was the only virgin that he married. Okay, and
So
that was
what,
important.
the only what?
Virgin that he married.
Was who?
Aisha.
And that was who?
The
Back
daughter of Abu Bakr,
Oh, okay.
his friend.
His friend, okay.
First caliph. You've heard of Imam, right? I-M-A-M is a leader of prayers.
Mhm.
The caliph is like the leader of the community, like the leader of the, so, and obviously he was closest when the prophet died. Abu Bakr became the first caliph. So Aisha, this is interesting about Aisha. According to one source, well, several sources, when Aisha first was very close to the prophet from age 6. And one story says, well, more than one story, a narrative says that she married him when she was 9. Okay. Now, I haven't figured out if there's a symbolism behind the number 9. We don't know if there's any kind of historic accuracy behind that. And one source I read says she was really 14 or 15. So, again, you have to look at the history behind it, communities, you know, were women younger when they got married and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, it was important, the story that she was a virgin, that was important because he was the messenger of God and the whole bit. Okay. Okay, so Umar was another one. That was a military type leader that converted to Islam. And the same, Umar was so mad at Muhammad because he was messing up the Quraysh and the pilgrimage and all the money that was coming into them. He says, I'm going to go kill Muhammad. And then one of the Muslims says, well, you better go talk to your sister. She's a Muslim. So he went and said, why are you a Muslim? And he got so mad he hit her. And then that's what changed him. Because he was so shocked that he hit her, he knew something was wrong. And she said, you need to read the Quran. So he started reading the Quran. It was beautiful words about equality, love, and all that kind of stuff. And that's what changed him. So Umar went up to the Prophet, and they thought he was really coming to kill him, but he wasn't. He was coming to beg, for forgiveness and to become a Muslim. That's an interesting story. All right, so Amr, Malik, they were a group, when the Muslims started becoming stronger, they started, the Quraysh, the polytheists started beating the Muslims. Okay? And some of them, the first martyr in Islam was a woman named Sumaya. Okay? She'd lay there and they'd beat the stew out of her, and she said there's only one God, and the God of Abraham, Muhammad is his prophet. And she's laying there, according to the narrative, being beat to death, and she died that way. But some of these others, like Malik, couldn't handle the beatings. So if they were on the ground being beat up, they'd say that beetle is a god or whatever, because they couldn't handle the pain. So because Malik didn't have any sort of clan support, he and some of the other Muslims went to Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia. Okay? Because there was a Christian king there that was kind. So they went to Abyssinia and lived as Muslims there because the Christian king welcomed them because they believed in the same, the one God. Okay. Now this guy Amir chased them and tried to tell the Christian king, because he knew the Christian king, they're bad, they don't believe in Jesus as the Son of God and all this, and he couldn't get them because the king liked them because they were peaceful, loving, and they believed in one God of Abraham, even though their thoughts were a little different about Jesus. So that's how the narrative goes. So eventually Amir became a Muslim. He was another one of these big, strong, burly guys that eventually later on became a Muslim. Now this guy Abu Sufyan ended up being a leader, one of the leaders of the Muslims later on. Very, very important person. And also Khalid, very important in their role in Islam. Okay, so this is interesting. I'll go back. I jumped ahead a little bit when talking about people, but all right. Abu Talib was the prophet's overseer, like parent, and there was this Christian monk that was farther away from Mecca and invited the Quraysh because he was reading some manuscripts, and he had this feeling that there was a prophet in the Quraysh, this clan. So all these men would go over there because he said, I'll feed you, I'll take care of you, we'll have drinks, we'll have a good time. So they went to meet this monk, Bahir is his name, and so they went there, and the monk looks at all of them and says, none of you guys are right. Did you forget somebody? At the time, Muhammad was either 9 or 12. One source says 9, one says 12. So they said, well, no, we didn't forget anybody except for a 9-year-old kid. He's like, bring the 9-year-old kid. So they went back, got Muhammad, brought him back, and this monk said, he's the prophet. He's the one. So that's the story, how it goes. He had all these old manuscripts. So it was pretty interesting.
It makes me think of David too.
Yeah, same kind of thing. There might be some,
Yeah.
some similarities there.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about Bedouin were nomads in the area. The Koresh were actually nomads at one time. But the thought was back then, if you're not a nomad, if you're not moving around, then that's not good because you get stuck, you get settled, you don't learn, but the Koresh stayed put by the Kaaba because they controlled it and they had wealth because of that reason. And they still had their slaves and all that kind of stuff. So pre-Islamic says there were idol worship. And what do we say about idol worship when we talked about Judaism? What could idol worship be? Like the idols could be based on greed or lust or something. So there's a symbolism why idol worship is typically frowned upon, maybe in the Old Testament and the Quran, because it's based on these idols. You give them money and they give you something, like you can cheat or do something like that. So it's the theology behind that. And there was slavery, inequality, and in some cases one source, the source from Lebanon, says there was human sacrifice. There was a couple sources that says it was not that frequent. And there was some sort of test they would do on children when they were young, saying that if it didn't work out for them, that they were, sent off. So it was things like that. So what Islam brought, this is the actual cave where he supposedly got his messages from Gabriel. And the way it started was the angel came to him and says, recite. He says, I can't recite, or in some cases it says, read. I can't read because Muhammad was considered to be illiterate according to the narratives. So he says, I can't read. Why? Who are you? What are you doing to me? And the angel finally said, recite in the name of the Lord who created man from a clot of blood. And he says, okay, I'll say it. And he comes running out of the cave because the story says he was upset and went to Khadijah, his wife, and says, what the heck's happened to me? And so Khadijah went to her cousin, who was a blind Christian monk, and asked him, what's going on? My husband's saying that he's received these crazy messages from this angel. And the monk says, he's a prophet. He needs to not ignore them. So that's how the story goes. Now the angel Gabriel is mentioned in what book in the Old Testament? Carrie?
Luke.
Daniel, the Old Testament.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He is mentioned in the New Testament too. Yeah. But he is mentioned in Luke.
I think he is.
Yeah.
I didn't
You're
reach
right.
that old, or I wasn't listening.
Yeah. No, the Old Testament he's mentioned in Daniel, so you got to think about that. Well, was there some influences in that way there? Not saying that the prophet, if he was an actual historical figure, didn't receive, but then you have to think, let's say Muhammad was a historical figure, and we know the Quran has got some Gnostic influences probably. Some scholars say that. So you got to think, if he was a historical figure, did he receive these, some messages, and did he get confused and hear things, from the people around and get it all, confused? Okay, so you could speculate all day long, I guess. But anyway, that's the narrative. Okay, so the message of the Quran: respect Christians, no coercion in the matters of faith, considered to be people of earlier revelation, just like we talked about. And in Muslim Spain, which was called Al-Andalus, I think Al-Andalus is the Arabic, it says it was southern Spain where Christians and Muslims lived peacefully, and Jews lived peacefully for many, many years. Which, it's very clear in the Quran. So then you have to ask the question, how do these so-called Islamic extremists who ran airplanes into the Twin Towers, what was their rationale? What could possibly be their rationale? When you know in the Twin Towers, there were Muslims that died that day, there were Christians, there were Jews that died that day. So what's the rationale about people of the book? Where did they miss? Where did they miss it?
Would it be in their definition of defense?
Or they were considered infidels some way, because of the money.
I mean, one of the hot, really sore spots is in it when Christians or infidels, maybe that term is synonymous with them, set foot on their land.
That's true.
And so, we had the Gulf War.
Right. But
I mean,
that
that's
doesn't.
the defense.
Right, but that doesn't. There were innocent people, and there's something in the Quran says you don't kill innocent people. Very clear. So, something Karen Armstrong wrote a book on Muhammad right after the 9/11 attacks, basically saying that these guys were nuts, and that they did quote Muhammad saying that you have to be patient, all that. These terrorists did, and but what happened to the defense, the peace, to live peacefully with Christians and Jews? I don't know exactly, but it would be interesting research to see what kind of mentality those terrorists had when it came to that, or if they were just crazy to begin with.
Well, one of bin Laden's big gripes was that the United States had so many people in Saudi Arabia, and they've got that stricter sect, the Wasabis or whatever they call it, in Saudi Arabia. And I was thinking, from what I'd read about him, he was just incensed that Americans were there.
Yeah, but that still doesn't make it right. It's still.
Oh, I'm not saying it's right.
No,
I'm
I
just
know.
trying to understand.
I mean, from his perspective, it doesn't make it
Even
right.
for using his logic.
Using his logic,
Right.
it doesn't make it right.
Yeah, I guess I've had conversations and heard the same thing, Sarah, as far as, setting up shop in the Holy Land. It's like, you're going to piss some people off, it's like poking a stick in a beehive. And the Twin Towers are symbolic of capitalism, so.
Right, but there were Muslims in those Twin Towers that were working.
Well, there's no rationale for it.
Right.
But if you, in conversation about trying to figure out what their perspective was or why the Twin Towers as a target.
They were just crazy. You know what else it says in the Quran? Suicide is strictly forbidden. Strictly forbidden.
But,
So-
I mean, yeah, that may be in there, but, is that being taught? Or is that do these people sit down and read their own
Probably not.
Quran?
Because most Muslims in Pakistan, I know, they're 50% illiterate.
Well, that's my point. You're not having...
Right. They're not reading it. They're not understanding the historical behind it.
But isn't there a verse, what is that verse in the Quran that says something like kill the infidels, or, there is a passage.
Yeah, there
I've
is.
forgotten what it is, and so what is that one?
But you have to read the whole paragraph.
That's where you went on and said, if you're defending.
Yeah. You
yourself.
read the whole paragraph, because some people pull that piece out, and that's what it says that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But-
but they can, in their minds, they can say, well, this is defending ourselves because we're trying to, get these capitalistic...
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, when there's like-
you can twist and turn it and make it...
And if bin Laden were here and we said your reasoning is not logical, he would have a reply to that of some sort.
It's unfortunate that, that so many people have had to die, and I know that we've had military attacks done by drones, that are set out to kill specific, bad guys. But innocent people die, and unfortunately, I mean, I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about jihad and becoming
Yeah.
a martyr?
It's coming.
Okay,
It's coming.
because it's kind of.
But I think, all right, in Islam, and this is coming too, there's the 5 pillars of faith. And one of them is charity and prayer. And the other one's prayer, and one's a pilgrimage to Mecca. I don't remember the other two right now. But, all right, let's say you're a Muslim, okay? And you're supposed to respect the people of the book. And in the Twin Towers, the people that died were probably giving quite a bit of charity, and they were God-fearing Christian people or Muslims or Jews. Okay? So if you know just that little piece, there is no rationale. I mean, if you have a problem with the government, and then you do work at a different angle or something. But killing people that are charitable and are prayerful, God-fearing people, there's just no logic to that.
It's really sad that, the text is a peaceful text, but those extremists who act out with terrorism, paint a bad picture for the whole community.
Yeah, it is. And it's really hurt the Muslims in America too.
Absolutely.
So,
Quick question about that slide, Tank. When it says consider to be people of the earlier revelation, does that mean the Jews
yes,
and
Jews.
the Christians?
Yes.
So they would give them earlier credence. Okay.
Right. But they think the Christians got the thing about Jesus a little bit wrong. Okay, about him being actually the Son of God. Okay. So that's why, the Christians are fine, but you're not quite right about Jesus. He's just a prophet. Okay, so Ummah, it means community. And you're supposed to, again, what we just talked about, compassion, charity, fair distribution of wealth, negative view on theological speculation. It's important. But instead live in the manner where God intended human beings. So I got an argument with this guy who basically is reading this person named Robert Spencer, and he is pretty much attacks the Muslims, saying they're all crazy. And so we got an argument, and he's like, well, the Muslims are this. Muhammad was evil. Muhammad did this, and all this, because he's getting one perspective. And if the guy's maybe not even a historical figure, so you have one perspective from the Muslims that says Muhammad was a compassionate, great man, and they believe that and they follow him. And then you have another perspective that says, no, he was evil. But they're not. But he wasn't looking at the historical picture and the world Muslim view. So most Muslims follow the pillars of faith: prayer, charity, compassion, things like that. So, basically, I got an argument, and I told him to go jump in a lake, and so I asked a friend of mine who's a scholar where I went to school. And I said, well, how can he say, what did he say about it? Oh, Muhammad killed all these Jews, okay, in Medina. Well, Muhammad, according to one of the stories, says they twice tried to poison Muhammad. So he was having a fit with the Jews. And again, there's questions on exactly what happened. But, so I asked my friend, and he says, well, there hasn't been a lot of theological speculation around that until recently, like I said earlier. And that's key. Again, they're just now starting to really get into the theology behind it, behind the Quran, behind the historical Muhammad, and which I think is important, it really is. Okay, here are some messages from the Quran. And I guess Bin Laden didn't read this. Oh, humanity, we created you from a pair, that you may not despise or despise each other. Okay, man and woman. In two nations, you may not despise each other. Okay, so I guess Bin Laden didn't read that one. If anyone kills a person, unless it be for, like, he's spreading mischief or something throughout the whole land, or he's killed somebody, then it's like you killed the whole people. So basically it's saying if you kill an innocent person, it's like you killed everybody. Just saying it's a huge, big mistake. And then another part of the Quran says, do not let your hatred of people incite you to aggression. And then, let's see, I've got a couple more. Do not kill yourselves. This is the suicide one. For truly God is most merciful. If you do, if any of you do in spite of an injustice, soon be cast into fire. And then the last one says, you shall not kill any person, for God has made life sacred except in the course of justice. And maybe that's where they take the accepting course of justice. And each chapter of the Quran is called surah.
It's just funny that the New Testament says, do not kill any person.
Right.
But I mean, that he takes it a little bit, except for a little injustice.
Yeah.
I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like leaving it open
Yeah.
to interpretation. That's a big if, or a big qualification.
That is a big if.
Because spreading mischief in the land, how's that defined?
You have the same problem though in Christianity and Judaism in terms of, okay, if you kill while you're part of war, is that violating the command?
War. That's
I mean,
just
you will
war.
have to.
But what I'm saying is, though, the commandment is,
Yeah.
thou
Do
shalt
not
not kill.
kill.
There is no unless in Jesus's in the commandments. I mean, we have made it an unless, and you know, you can find that. But I'm saying the commandment, the quote, and even Jesus, thou shalt not kill. It doesn't say thou shalt not kill, you know, unless there's mischief spread around. That's just one. I mean.
On the other hand, in the Old Testament,
Oh, I know that.
the Lord
I know that.
says,
But in
go
the
out
Quran-
and kill these people.
Well, and in the Quran, there's
Yeah.
stuff like that too, Tank. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is that the commandment says,
Yeah.
you know, I know that all through the Old Testament there's killings and go kill this, go. I understand that.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, you know, the commandment is thou shalt not kill. But I'm saying that, you know, they say, you know, you see what I'm saying? They kind of even open it up a little bit.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
What about, I'm curious, the next to last bullet that you had there, wait a minute, I think that, do
Oh,
not
you-
kill or you'll be cast into the fire. Well, what's the verse that says, kill these infidels or whatever and you'll get X number of virgins in
You
heaven?
don't, that's
Is
not
that
in-
not in the Quran at
no.
all?
But,
Where does that come from?
It's, I think it actually comes from the Old Testament. Yeah. Because there's no such thing, and someone asked me, it was Alan Foster, asked me that. And I said, that doesn't exist in the Quran anywhere. My
there's
friend Alan
something.
Foster is a commissioner.
No, I know. But me and Alan looked at that.
Yeah, there's no,
Let's leave that open for tomorrow. I got to go.
Oh,
Okay.
I do too.
well, it's already 1:30,
Yeah.
and thank you for your time. And we'll finish tomorrow.
I can't come tomorrow, I'm sorry.
I have one question before we finish.
Uh-huh.
I'm just curious because earlier there was mention of Satan like touching, you know, the newborn and putting evil on them, and here is the fire. So, what is the belief of like heaven and hell? Is there any source? Is that
There's a belief in heaven and hell.
yeah?
And
Is it similar to
Yes.
that of Christianity?
It's almost the same.
Okay.
Except
Yeah.
in. Did you see the except?
I did, but I chose to stop right
Well, no. But what I'm
There is-
saying
I
is
forgot
that,
to mention
that
the
it's
black
funny.
stone.
It's funny that even in I'm just saying it's funny that they chose to add that. Do you see what I'm saying? They were familiar with the Ten Commandments.
Right.
Okay, they're familiar with
Well,
that.
they're supposed to follow it too.
Well, I know, but I'm
Yeah.
saying they kind of conditionalized it. Which, you know, I'm not saying that there's not killing in the Old or New Testament at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the original commandment just said, thou shalt not kill. I'm saying they chose to qualify it. So,
before I
Yeah.
step over it.
That's right.
Will you email us the slides?
Yeah, I'm gonna send you the others. I don't think I
And for
ever sent
tomorrow.
you the other slides either, did I?
Yeah.
Oh, I did? Oh,
That's
okay,
pretty
good.
neat. I like to do that.
So,
I want to talk about the black stone tomorrow.
Uh,
I forgot to talk about the black stone, which is in the Kaaba, very important. Thanks.
I'm gonna wear my sweater over here then. No wonder I got cold walking.
you
My
have a sweater
overs-
on.
I mean, this one is my, not my outer.
Yeah,
sweater.
yeah.
This is